Today's webinar is 2011 PhysTEC Request for Proposals. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's presentation features Dr. Ted Hodapp, who will be moderated by Dr. Monica Plish. Ted will be giving information on the PhysTEC project, including instructions for how to apply for funding. After Ted finishes his presentation, the remainder of the program will belong to you for our question and answer session. Because of the number of people attending this webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel located on the right side of your screen. I also want to remind our listeners that you can continue to submit questions through the questions panel throughout the webinar, and we will answer all of your questions at the end. We will do our best to cover all the questions that you submit, but want to apologize if we are unable to cover everything. Finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be mailed to you after today's event. It will also be made available on the PhysTEC solicitation page, and I will send out the URL for that to you all. We encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. And so with that, let's get started. Moderating the discussion today will be Dr. Monica Plish. Dr. Plish is Assistant Director of Education for the American Physical Society. She is a co-PI for the Physics Teacher Education Coalition, PhysTEC, and manages several initiatives within this project, as well as serving on the National Task Force on Teacher Education in Physics. Before coming to the APS, Dr. Plish served as Director of Education Programs at the Center for Nanoscale Systems at Cornell University, where she developed programs for pre-college students and teachers to learn about contemporary physics and developed an undergraduate lab course on nanotechnology. Okay, with that, I will turn things over to you, Monica.
Thanks, Crystal. Today we have Ted Hodapp, as Crystal mentioned, joining us to talk about the PhysTEC Request for Proposals and how to obtain funding as a PhysTEC-supported site. Ted is the Director of Education and Diversity for the American Physical Society. In addition to administering programs related to education and careers at APS, Ted is also Principal Investigator on the PhysTEC project and the Minority Bridge program. Before coming to APS, Ted served as Program Director in the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation and was a professor and chair of the Hamline University Physics Department in St. Paul, Minnesota. His research interests include laser cooling, optical modeling, and physics education research. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Ted.
All right, very good. Let me just get my screen up here and do that. And a little click here. All right, can you see that, Monica?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, very good. Okay. All right, well, welcome, and thanks for coming to the webinar. I'll tell you a little bit about the webinar. Is going to be kind of three things. One is it will tell you give you a little bit of information about the background, about some of the need which might be useful for you in thinking about this and talking with your administration. Second, it's a brief description of the project, and then third, most of the time we'll spend on how to apply for funding through the PhysTEC project. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions. If we don't get to all of the questions, you should feel free to contact Monica or myself after the presentation, either by email, which is probably preferred, or by phone, and we can answer questions for you that might come up that you didn't feel like got answered. So let me just jump into this. And again, as Crystal pointed out, there's a questions box over on the side. Type in a question at any time, and we'll get to those as we go along. All right, let's see if this is going to advance my slides. And so far, not the case. There we go. All right. So just a brief look at some of the significant need that's out there in high school physics teachers. This is a survey that was given to the people who get jobs for high school physics teachers. So these are kind of, if you will, placement people in schools of education around the country, and they're given a survey on an annual basis. The last data we have is from 2009, in which they asked, if I want to get a position for my teacher, how easy is it to get? Well, 1 would mean it was extremely difficult, that there was an oversupply. A 5 would mean it was extremely easy to get them a job, but there was an undersupply. As you can see, and these are the top ranked ones. There's nobody above them. Math, physics, and chemistry, along with special ed, are the highest ranked in this area. Biology actually is down a significant notch or 2, and so it's a critical need that is found by these folks who are doing that. There's also been a number of calls for action and things to do. This is from the report Rising Above the Gathering Storm. If you haven't taken a look at this, I would strongly recommend. It remains a very relevant document for policymakers today, and it's continually quoted as being one of the most important kind of statements that's come out recently about what the United States needs to do to regain or maintain its competitive nature in the world. Its number one, A1 recommendation is to recruit a large number of new numbers of teachers, 10,000 new science and math teachers each year. So this is something that is in the minds of policymakers, and it is something that is just one of the numerous documents that's come out recently to talk about the importance of teacher education. Here's a little snapshot of the teachers who are out there today. So this is some data from the American Institute of Physics Statistical Research Center. And if you look, the lines here tell you the degrees with which high school physics teachers have. So they go out and survey high school physics teachers. You can see about a third, 26 plus 9%, so that's, what is that called, 35%, of all high school teachers have a degree in physics, which means that the rest don't have a degree in physics, they have a degree in something else. If you include the others, you get up to 44% of teachers who have at least a minor in physics or physics education, considerably less than what's going on outside. A comparable but slightly different number is a survey that's done by the National Center for Education Statistics. This is run out of the Department of Education. Their so-called schools and staffing survey. And they looked at the fraction of students who receive instruction in a particular field from somebody who actually has a degree in that. So if you look at math, for example, 73% of all students, as opposed to all teachers, have a teacher who has a math degree. English and social studies, it's in the low 80s. Biology, also about 3/4. Physics down around 51. Chemistry is also very poor on this survey as well. So this is for 2007-2008, this academic year. So just to kind of give you a sense that at least about roughly half of the students who are taking physics, taking high school physics, are doing it for somebody who does not have a major in the field. Part of the reason for doing PhysTEC is to address this issue. Here's a little picture of the current enrollment in high school physics classes. So, and a little bit about the demography of what's going on. So, currently, according to AIP, there are about 27,000 teachers of physics. Now, a teacher of physics can be anything from someone whose full-time load is to teach physics to someone who teaches a single course in physics. The number who teach full loads obviously is significantly less than those who just teach a single one, especially given how physics is often taught in small rural districts. And there are some significant concerns there for people who have to offer the degree. Each year, due to retirements and people leaving the field for a variety of reasons, we have to hire a new 1,200 new teachers in physics each year. We produce about 400 that have a physics major each year who go into teaching. So we're only supplying about a third of the active need each year, roughly speaking. Now, the graph down below gives you a sense of how physics enrollment in high school is changing. The critical thing I think you'll see here is that the enrollment is going up. The red line is going up quite significantly. It's now over almost 1.5 million students each year. But perhaps another way of looking at that is it's not just the numbers, but it's the fraction of students who are taking it. It's not plotted here, but the fraction of students who are taking physics is going up by about 8% per decade. So larger numbers of students are taking physics, and this is due to a couple of reasons. One, more colleges are requiring that students take the most rigorous courses. Physics is considered one of those. In some states, including Texas, which I'll mention later on for other reasons, unfortunately, they are now requiring 4 years of high school science, and so many, many more students are taking physics. So there's a big concern about, can we prepare enough teachers to provide for this? A parallel statistic is the fraction of physics students, so these are the students who are taking high school physics, the fraction that actually take honors physics, and that number is almost a third of that. And so surely we want to make sure that the teacher who teaches that course has some significant background if they're going to be taking AP or honors physics. So one of the reasons why there's a shortage of teachers is that there actually aren't a lot of physics majors out there. So this is just kind of a reminder of something about the demographics of undergraduate physics majors as they progress through time here. The red line is the actual number of physics majors up through, I think the data here only goes through 2008. There's actually 2010 data, which I just heard about last week, in which the number of physics majors actually topped 6,000 for the first time in history. So we're actually producing a record number of physics majors, although if you were to take this graph and normalize it for the U.S. population, U.S. population goes up about 1% per year, you'll find that actually the relative number of physics majors has been going down pretty much since the early 70s. Compare this to the total number of STEM degrees. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. This is dominated strongly by biology and engineering. And those numbers have been going up dramatically. There are now close to 400,000 undergraduate degrees granted each year in those fields. And if you normalize that for the population, you find that that is still increasing. And that mirrors the numbers of jobs that are going on. So one of the things that you should be considering and thinking about when you're trying to educate high school teachers is where will those teachers go? Well, they become your best recruiters for your field and for your program. Most high school teachers, and PhysTEC has some data on this, which I'm not going to present, but most high school teachers stay within about 50 miles of where they grew up or where they're educated. They get jobs around there, and then they start sending physics majors or prospective physics majors to your institution. So they're one of your best sources for recruiting new students into your program. And you should really pay attention to this if you're concerned at all about the enrollment within your program. Again, a little bit more about that later on. All right, so now a little bit on there. There's a little on the data. Let me talk a little bit about the project itself. So this is a project that's been going on for about 10 years, since 2000, and funded through the National Science Foundation and through some funds that the APS raised through its 21st Century campaign. It's jointly sponsored by the American Physical Society and the American Association of Physics Teachers. And again, as I said, we started in 2010 and going since then. We're on our second NSF grant at this time. We thank the NSF for their generous funding. And you notice that it's been funded both from undergraduate education, but also from the physics directorate, and Division of Material Research. So those research directorates realize the importance of educating people in physics and trying to find ways to provide education. I'm sure many of you, if you ask your undergraduates why they decided to study physics, many of them will say, I had a great high school physics teacher. So if you're worried about where the next set of majors are coming from, ask your students and find out where they came from. You can probably find the answer to that question. All right, a little bit about the goals. We have 3 basic goals. The first is to create a set of models that will increase the number of highly qualified high school physics teachers. Pretty straightforward. We also have a secondary goal in which we look at the quality of K-8 physical science teachers. That's not a major aspect of the project, but it is something that we devote a little bit of resources to. And if you look within the solicitation, you'll see a line about that, or a paragraph about that, that will give you some sense of that. But that's mostly to deal with elementary education and how we can offer courses there. So I'll just emphasize that this is to look at successful models. We're not here just to fund programs because your program needs it. We're trying to fund programs that will produce national models that we can show to other individuals to say, you could be doing this at your institution as well. And many of the things that we have done within the project have been copied by a number of institutions. So partly, as you'll see in a minute, institutions who have been funded, we ask them to be kind of the, if you will, the guinea pigs on some of these things, but also to be willing to be contacted by other institutions to say, how do I do this kind of thing? What is it that I need to do? So this is an important aspect. Second, something that we as a professional society do mostly is to spread some of these ideas. We do this through conferences and through talking about it, getting the president of the APS, for example, to say the importance of teacher education, but to talk about it and through publications and that stuff. And third, and this is probably the most important reason, I realize that we want to create more high school physics teachers, which 1A talks about, but we're really here to change the way departments work. We're really here to transform physics departments into thinking about their role, their critical role in preparing high school physics teachers. And so if you're going to apply for money, you need to think about the buy-in that your department has. Because if it's just you, I want to do this thing, but it's not going to have an impact on how the department works, that doesn't necessarily cut what we want to do. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. The PhysTEC project as a project has two main kind of sections. One is our national coalition of member institutions. We now have, I think, almost 250 actually member institutions, which by the way is about a third of all of the institutions in the country that grant a physics degree. We run a national conference, and I'll put another plug-in for that later on, but it'll be coming up just before the winter AAPT meeting in Ontario, California, just at the beginning of February in 2012. We have some websites. If you haven't been to visit the PhysTEC or the PTEC website, by the way, those two websites will be combining in the near future, but for now, you can get information about best practices there. The other aspect, and which I'm sure you're all interested in, is that we fund sites, either through comprehensive or targeted sites, and we promote them as national models. We talk about them, we take pictures of them, put them in all sorts of things that we can. We want to make sure that these institutions are spotlighted for what's going on, and we want to change what's going on from just the business as usual to an emphasis at physics departments to educating these teachers. Here's a map kind of giving a sense of where the PhysTEC member institutions are pretty much all over the country. We're still missing Alaska, North Dakota, and Vermont, but we're working on them. So they're pretty much spread across the country. The red dots are places that we have funded in the past. As you can see, the number of sites has gone up pretty steadily for what's going on. By the way, if you're not on there, you do need to be a member institution to apply for this funding. It's quite easy to do so. Go to the PTEC site, ptec.org, and there's a join the coalition there. The only thing that we ask you for as a member institution is to report on an annual basis your education of high school physics teachers. Here's a little bit about the project and how we've been successful. Just to kind of walk you through this graph, the gray bar on the far left of each institution indicates the number of teachers, the total number of teachers that were educated in 3 years. So Arizona, Arkansas, Cal Poly all had one teacher in the 3 years preceding funding. Then the blue lines are the ones during the funding, and you can see that they've ramped up. Green, I think, is our most interesting and best product of this thing, because that is the production of teachers for the 3 years following funding. And this is what we're looking to do. We can't provide money for you to run your program forever, but what we can do is get you going in what's happening and to give you a sense of the right kind of elements that need to be in place to make sure that you can continue to educate high school teachers and you can continue to support them as they go out into the field. Compare that to the orange bars, which is how the rest of the country changed in those 3-year time periods. And you can see that we've had a significant impact on what's going on. And we're interested in institutions that are really going to commit to what's going on. Here's a list of the sites that have been out there. Let me just draw it. The blue ones are ones that we funded in this last year. We typically fund about a half a dozen sites each year. We'll fund them this coming year, and we'll fund them the following year. And I'll talk a little bit about how the selection process works in just a minute. Let me just pull a couple of these out. Let's see. So Chicago State University. This is a small liberal arts college in the south side of Chicago. It's a black serving institution. And they have built a program that partners very strongly with the Chicago Community College system to get community college students to think about becoming high school teachers. And they funnel them into their 4-year program and help them through their student teaching and the other things that exist already at Chicago State. Another site, let's see, Middle Tennessee State University. So Middle Tennessee is a UTeach replication site. If you don't know about UTeach replication, we can point you to their website. This is a program that was started by the University of Texas at Austin and is now in national replication around the country. That there are about 24 sites, I think, currently. And Middle Tennessee was chosen as a UTeach replication site. However, you can talk to the founder even of the UTeach, and while they produce quite a few high school teachers, most of them are in biology and mathematics. Well, I got to tell you, biology, we actually don't need a lot more biology teachers. I like biology teachers, but the numbers are already up there. What we do need is physics teachers and chemistry teachers. So one of the things that we've done is work with some of the UTeach sites to get them to consider ramping up their efforts specifically within physics. Now, we won't give the full comprehensive site proposals to UTeach replication, but we can provide some money to put an emphasis on the physics aspect of UTeach replication, and that's exactly what's going on at Middle Tennessee. If you want to talk to Ron Henderson at MTSU, I suggest he's the chair of the department there. He's the leader there and can tell you a little bit about the efforts that they've done. In fact, the UTeach replication is providing for the teacher in residence, which is an aspect of our comprehensive sites there. Let me do one more. Let's see. Virginia Tech is a new one. This is led by Beata Schmidtman. She's the chair of the physics department there. This is a research university in the southwestern corner of Virginia. They're hoping to become the main producer of high school physics teachers, not just for Virginia, but for also some of the surrounding states. In fact, they've already had inquiries from those states thinking that once you start producing teachers, we would like to employ them here because we have a great need. One of the things that we require of all the sites is for them to have good introductory courses. We do not actually fund you to change your introductory course. If you want to do that, you can go to the NSF through the TUES program, the TUES program, or other avenues. That's something that you need to do yourself. So we won't fund that, but for example, at Virginia Tech, they had already implemented scale-up classrooms. Scale-up is a reform that started at North Carolina State University. Very good, lowers the drop rate. It was copied almost iota for iota by MIT and their TEAL program. So there's a lot of good examples of good student-centered learning activities that go in there. So they have that. They've got a TIR now, TIR who's working with their practicing teachers. One of the things that Beata did, which I think is a really smart move, is she went to the education department and she went to the provost and she said, if the physics department will put up some funds, can we get matching from the School of Education and from the provost to fund the components of PhysTEC for 3 years past the time in which PhysTEC will fund things? They agreed. So they now have a great sustainability project in place there that allows them to say, look, we are ready to take on not just a 3-year commitment from PhysTEC, but a 6-year commitment. And by then, things will be well established at the university, and we know that we can move forward. So it's an important sense of sustainability. I'll come back to sustainability in a minute, but it's a critical aspect that the committee who evaluates these proposals will look at. All right, so there are several key components about teacher education programs. I'm going to tell you right away, these are not rocket science. If you go to look at teacher education programs around the country, you'll see that they do most, if not all, of these things. But we ask you to do these things, and it's not hard to do them, but it is important that you do them. So just to run these down relatively quickly, recruitment, that's pretty obvious. If you don't ask teachers, you don't get people into the program, well, there won't be anybody there. And some people say, well, if I build a great program, people will just find out about it and they'll come into it. That can't be the attitude. You have to be an active agent in bringing the students into this. This can be posters, it can be crazy stunts, it can be articles in the newspaper, it can be radio spots. A lot of different institutions have done it in different ways and have been successful at bringing new students in. Oftentimes, students don't even know that you produce high school teachers. And so just getting the word out there is enough. I can recall several stories where I've gone and given talks and say, hey, if you want to do this, come and talk to your professor, and all of a sudden people will come down and do that. There's oftentimes a pent-up demand for that by the students. Like most good programs, we require that the students who become teachers have an early teaching experience, and we think the earlier you do it, the better. So this typically means you can start out with something like a learning assistance program, learning assistance, which is now adapted by most of the PhysTEC sites, not all of them, but most of them, is a program where students who have taken, say, the introductory course go back maybe the next semester or 2 semesters later to help as peer leaders inside that class. Very effective at improving the gain scores of the students who are taking that, improving the knowledge of the learning assistants, but more importantly, helping those students, those learning assistants, think about their role as a teacher and to realize whether they have what it takes to do it or not. Oftentimes the students will come in thinking, well, I did okay, this looks like a good job, I'm going to come in and do this, and they come out of it saying, wow, I really enjoy working with students. I think this could be something I would like to pursue. Others are going to come out and say, I really don't enjoy doing this. I need to get out of this right away. And that's good too, because you need to know who is going to be working with the students the best. So learning assistance program has been very successful. But beyond that, I think early teaching means you need to get out in the classroom as well. And you need to experience what's it like to be in a classroom. So part of this is that you need to be involved with the schools directly. You need to know who are the good high school teachers. Your school of education will know some of these things, but oftentimes schools of education, if they're like most institutions, well, they saw one physics teacher come through last year, and then there was one about 4 years ago, I think. And so they don't really have a big program in mind for high school physics teachers. We really want you to be turning them out at a couple a year, and then they pay attention to it oftentimes. But another way to do it is to find out, Towson, in fact, did this very nice idea, to look at high school. They asked their majors, did you have a great high school teacher? And if they did, they said, wow, let's go and talk to this person. So they went back and talked to these high school teachers and found these are people that they could then place their prospective teachers in. And it was really a great way to connect back to the high schools to know what's going on. So a part of this is early teaching experiences, know where you can place those things, working with your school of education. The collaboration component here really says you've got to work between physics, the school of education, and the schools directly. If you haven't been over to your school of education and had a conversation with them, you need to do that. There also needs to be a component in terms of induction and mentoring. So once you educate, once you recruit them into the program, you educate them through the courses, then how do you actually help them into the coursework? Each of these components, by the way, is mentioned at the PhysTEC site, and you can read more details about it. I'll just mention a couple other quick things. One is the teacher in residence. This is a unique program for all our comprehensive sites. You must have a teacher in residence. This is a master teacher who is in residence at the university and helps with what's going on. People report that these are really critical things, even if they take up a good fraction of the budget, typically speaking. But ultimately, you'll find that this is one of the most valuable components of this project. We also suggest that you have a teacher advisory group, which is to bring high school teachers back, find out what their needs are and what they need to do, what you can do for them. Sustainability, I will just mention that when you apply for this, you need to think about what can you do after the funding is done, not just where you are right now. And so you need to ask for money that you know that you can sustain the efforts after the funding is done. A project that looks like, well, this is going to be a one-shot deal and we're not going to be able to do this later on will certainly not get funded. And also we have various assessment measures that we use for this project, not only to satisfy our NSF requirements, but also because we want to know whether this is working or not. A little bit about the RFP, and I'll talk about both the types of sites here very briefly. So first, we have 2 different types of sites, targeted and comprehensive. I'll mention those in a minute. They can go up to $25,000 per year for the targeted and up to $100,000 per year for comprehensive. You do not need to ask for the full amount. We've had many requests that ask for less. And again, I will get back to that sustainability comment, that you should ask for the amount of money that you know you're going to be able to maintain after the funding is done. We're asking you to become a national model, implement the key components. We have a number of expectations in terms of written reports, data gathering, and attending meetings, which we make clear within the solicitation. there's a review process, which I'll mention this in a moment here, along with the timeline. There's also the solicitation there. All right, so briefly here on the comprehensive sites. So this is these are the larger sites. They implement all of the PhysTEC key components. You hire a TIR, and you commit to a significant departmental and institutional effort to do this. This has got to be not just I want to do this because I thought this is a good idea, but your department needs to be behind this effort. If they're not behind this effort, it's going to be very difficult, and we'll see that. You need to provide data associated with the project funding, and there needs to be a sustained level of what's going on. The other thing, which is I think has tripped up a number of sites, and just kind of as a warning, is that we're really looking for these comprehensive sites to be places where we can get a significant number of teachers, a significant increase in the number of teachers out of the institution. So if you have 2 majors a year and you think you're going to get both of those to be PhysTEC high school teachers, that's probably not a good bet for a comprehensive site. You might think about a targeted site with a more specific project. So a little on targeted sites. Implement the components on an appropriate scale that seem to be maybe the ones that are missing from the current offerings of the institution. Again, we're thinking about significant departmental and institutional effort, but at an appropriate scale. So this might be at a primarily undergraduate institution. It might be at a UTeach replication site, those kinds of things. It could also be an out-of-the-box kind of problem. And so that's a way to think. Last year we funded one such out-of-the-box sort of thing, which was a video tool for learning assistants. But they have to be something that really specifically addresses teacher education. You have to agree to provide data with us. You're not required to have a TIR, but many of the projects have had part-time TIRs, and that's worked very well. Another example that you might want to do, like Chicago State or Cal State University San Marcos has done this as well, is to engage 2-year colleges. Briefly about the narrative. So there's 2 stages to this thing. First, you have to submit a 2-page for targeted or 3-page for comprehensive sites. You have to tell us what kind of proposal it's going to be in, give us briefly on the goals and the profile of the department, something about the existing program and the local personnel, how you're going to implement things, and a project budget. Realize that's a lot of information to fit into 2 or 3 pages, but last year we got 70 proposals, and what we typically do, or what we will be doing this year again, is to we review all of the 70 proposals, and then we ask a certain fraction of those, probably on the order of about 14 or so proposals, to come forward for a full proposal. And that's a full NSF-style 10-page proposal for comprehensive. It's slightly shorter for, or sorry, 15-page. Is it 15? I'm mistaking it. But a full proposal for a January timeline. In your 2 or 3 page, you need to have a project budget as well. So that doesn't need to be a very specific and detailed one, but a rough idea of the amount of money that you're going to be asking for. A little bit about budgetary information. As I mentioned before, the maximum is $25,000 or $100,000 per year, depending if it's targeted or comprehensive. You do not need to ask for the full amount, and you should be asking for what's sustainable. The TIR is typically a major expense for the comprehensive projects, and we understand that. Overhead rate is about, well, it's 24.73%, as indicated by the here. Fringe can be up to 33%, and you should discuss a little bit what the matching is going to be from your institution. Matching is not required, but it gives an indication to the panel what the commitment is from the university for doing these kinds of things. How are these evaluated? So first of all, a little on the procedure. If you're selected from the 2 or 3 pager to go to a full proposal, we'll let you know that by the 1st of December. And then you'll have till about the, I'll get the date here, I think it's around the 7th of January. You'll have till then to submit a full NSF-style proposal on the project. That's going to go to a panel of internal and external people who will evaluate each of these things. They will provide written comments to each of these. Those will be returned to you if you're successful or if you're not successful. And there's also a panel discussion. So it works very much like, and it's modeled on an NSF-style panel review. Not surprisingly, because several of us have been at the NSF in the past. And we think it's something that most people understand. So criteria, Potential to increase the number of high school teachers. Well, that's the first thing, implementing the components. Also, how is your site going to become a national model? How is it going to be distinguished from previously funded sites? You should talk to some of those sites if they think they're similar to you and say, how can you distinguish yourself? You need to be a model to other institutions. How are you going to improve on the PhysTEC model itself? You need to make sure that you have a good team and leadership. There needs to be an individual who's going to lead this program, who has the voice of the faculty. We typically require that that be a faculty member, not a staff member, typically speaking. And it needs to have institutional support. So that can be in a variety of things, but you need to know that this is going to go on past the time of the project. And in a full proposal, that will need to be in writing. And we also encourage improving diversity, and so we specifically encourage proposals from minority serving institutions. Here's something briefly, one more or two more slides here. What we do not fund, we're not here to fund you if you haven't done a lot of advanced planning. You don't have the buy-in of the department. So if you think you're going to come in and say, well, can you just start this for us? That's just not going to work. You need to have some planning, and you need to talk about this with your department. Have a conversation about this. Maybe this year isn't the right year for you to do that. Maybe you need to kind of get the conversation going, and next year you can do it. These need to be sustainable changes. So if the committee feels like this is not something that's going to stick there, that's not going to work. They need to be, we don't want to do unconnected programs. And we're not here to fund just learning assistance, for example, without a comprehensive program that ties into. If you're at a UTeach site, we're not going to fund your full program. We can do targeted sites at UTeach replication sites. But UTeach is providing a significant amount of money, and we're not here to replicate that. Department needs to provide resources and support, and this is also not a program to fund in-service teacher education. We realize that there are many great needs for in-service teacher education. However, at this point, we have made a decision to fund pre-service teacher education primarily. And another thing I'll just say, a real critical thing is you need to have a leader. Someone who is going to take this and lead it. I mentioned Beata Schmidtman as a great example of that. She's the chair of the department and really cares deeply about what's going on, but she also is the chair of the department. One of our previous projects at UNC Chapel Hill, Laura McNeil, chair of the department, same thing. Last slide here, just a sense of the timelines. Well, we're in the RFP process right now. Due at the end of October, in about 4 weeks, is a on the 26th of October at 5 p.m. local time. So whatever local time is for you. About 2-page or 3-page proposal. 2 if it's a targeted, 3 if it's a comprehensive site. So put your best ideas together. We will get responses back to you whether your proposal has been selected to go on to the next stage by the 1st of December. Then, if you're selected, you have either a 9 or a 15-page, depending on whether it's targeted or full or comprehensive, NSF-style proposal, and that's due by the 4th of January. So this includes the narrative, references, CVs, budget and budget justification, letters of support, and so on. That's kind of the standard thing you would submit for an NSF-style proposal. We typically select something in the order of half of those to be funded, so you have a much better chance. And we don't want to put people through the proposal writing process if we don't think you have a good chance of making it. There's a proposal review process that I mentioned earlier that will happen in late January by internal and external reviewers. And then we make funding decisions roughly in April. We go to visit some of the sites in March, typically speaking, and we make our decisions early April. By then, you need to kind of get going if you get selected, because you need to start your project by August of that year. And the last thing, I'll just mention that there is a PhysTEC meeting coming up on the 3rd and 4th of February. This is in Ontario, California. It's just prior to the AAPT winter meeting, which I also encourage you to attend. This PhysTEC meeting is a gathering of the leaders in physics teacher education from around the country. So if you want to learn about good ideas, even if you're not funded or if you are funded, this is a great place to do it. Talk to them. It's an informal setting with workshops and active learning things going on. And finally, if you haven't read the solicitation, read it very carefully. We expect that you do and respond to that carefully. All right, I think that's it, and I'll turn it back over to Monica.
Thanks, Ted. So we do have a number of questions, and we'll go through and answer as many of these as we can. And I encourage you to keep submitting questions. We'll address as many of these as we can. If we don't get to all the questions, you can certainly contact us, or we'll try to respond to them via email. All right, so we'll just take them in order here. The first question is about targeted proposals, and the question is innovation in teacher preparation required of the targeted proposals, or is this merely an asset?
I think it's, we're certainly looking for innovation, but I think that we're also looking for how do we do something that would be something that would be a model for other institutions. So for example, we have a couple of institutions which are smaller institutions, primarily undergraduate institutions. Have they been able to put together a successful program? And can they demonstrate how other smaller institutions might do the same thing? Even if you're graduating, say, 5, 6, 7 majors a year, how can you get 2 of those to become high school physics teachers? And how can you design something around that? So that might be a good thing. You could be doing something about community colleges. We would like to see innovation, but if it's in a new context, for example, that would be another place to do that. We are taking a look at models, but in the answer to that, we would like to see that can also be what is the context, and is the context different that makes it stand out, that we'd be able to talk about it to a national audience about what's going on.
All right, and next there's a couple of...
Monica, if you've got things to add to that, please join in.
Okay, I certainly will. So next there are a couple questions about sustainability. The first one is, are matching internal funds required during the grant period, or are they primarily necessary to sustain the program after the funding period?
So that's a question we get asked fairly often, and part of this is, I think, a question of how do you, as the leader of this effort, want to ensure that it sustains itself. And so part of this, I would say, is if you're funding what's going on and you want to make sure that your provost or dean or something like that buys into this thing, you may actually want to write in some of the funding during the funded period. It's not required for it to be during one particular thing. We do very strongly recommend that you get it in writing, so that if there's any question about that, you can go back to these kinds of things. Many of the projects have had the funding after the following the funded period, and that's certainly fine. But I think it's a question, how do you make sure that it's sustainable at your institution? And so sometimes what we do is kind of bleed in between the two. In fact, for many of the sites on our 3rd year of funding, we kind of split that between the 3rd and 4th year, so that they get they start up with their institutional funding on particular project components at that point. So there's no quick and easy answer to that, but I would say many of them have been following the funding, but you want to have it in writing, and you want to make sure that it's not renegable, if you will, on those kinds of things, and what works best for the context of your institution.
All right, next question is, again regarding sustainability, is it mandatory for university administrators to provide 3 years of support following PhysTEC, or can one raise funds from external sources?
It's not mandatory, but unless you've got a good track record for raising that kind of stuff, I think the panel is going to question that. At least that's been the history of the review panels on these kinds of things. So you can promise what you might on how you think you're going to be successful at doing that, but I think you need to be realistic that to some degree institutions need to be responsible for the teacher education programs that they have. I realize that it's not a great moneymaker, but it is a big community service. I remember a comment from Laurie McNeil at UNC Chapel Hill, in which she said, it's very difficult for me to talk with the community about how we have a great string theorist who's doing something here. But it's pretty easy for me to talk to them about how we created new high school teachers for their community. So part of this is going to be on the backs of the institution, and many of the PhysTEC sites that I've mentioned and who have been funded have found funding internally, and you need to argue for that within your institution. If you're really successful at raising money externally, that could be a plus, but I would say you're going to be, you'll have a better success if you can get your institution to commit to its own funds on there. I would say that some of our places have been successful at getting external funds. In fact, significant amounts of funds, but partly because their institution is committed to it, and partly because they were providing the leadership internally to make this go forward.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen any PhysTEC site that has sustained their program entirely on external funds. I would say there's typically, while that might be part of the mix, there certainly has, along with that, been a significant amount of internal funds as well.
Yeah, I think Towson, Cal State, or Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, a couple other places that have maintained teachers and residents specifically out of line item budgets, that they were able to convince their administration, this is a good idea, you need to fund this, and other places as well.
So another question here from someone who writes that my university is located near a site that is already a comprehensive site, but my university is historically a teacher preparation university, particularly in the physical sciences. Will the relative proximity to a comprehensive site hurt my chances of obtaining PhysTEC funding?
Well, it depends a little bit on what the need is in the local area. So if you're in a small town and there's 2 universities there and the other university is doing it, yeah, probably it will. But if you're in a bigger metropolitan area where there's a significant need that the other institution is not going to be able to meet that need, then I think that it can be realized to do that. I will say that we're also looking for geographic and other kinds of diversity. So it's the fact that there is another institution nearby is a concern, but it's not a deal breaker, if you will, on what's going on. So I think you have to look at the larger picture of need within the community and relative supply and evaluate that. And I think you would have to address that in a proposal.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned earlier, Ted, is that what we found is that most PhysTEC teachers, about 60% of graduates from PhysTEC sites, end up within 50 miles of the institution that they're teaching, within 50 miles of the graduation, the institution they graduated from. So that's kind of, in terms of geographic diversity, that's a number that we'll be looking at. But it's not just that. It's, if you can sort of make a case for where your teachers go and what communities they serve and how that is going to be, I guess, different from the institution that might also be a PhysTEC site nearby, that could also address that concern.
Yeah. You could easily imagine a place like New York City, for example, having several ones and still not being able to meet the need.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right, yeah, so obviously population density certainly plays a role in there as well. Okay, a question about applying for targeted versus comprehensive sites. So if you apply as a targeted site, can you later apply as a comprehensive site?
Yes, you can. The question is what's going to be sustainable. So if you see yourself applying this year as targeted, but a targeted site is going to be several years, will PhysTEC actually be offering comprehensive sites in 3 years? I don't know the answer to that question right now. We have funding for another couple of years of funding. We're thinking about our own kind of legacy in terms of what we need to do as we go forward. That hasn't been decided yet, and funding is not there right now. So I think that the answer is that what you need to do is look at what is sustainable at your institution. And if you think okay, well, I can do something, and it doesn't exactly meet the targeted, it doesn't exactly meet the comprehensive, you know, you can propose something else. Might be a very low-funded comprehensive site, for example, at 150,000 total, for example, would be something that people could look at. So it's certainly not beyond the limit. We actually have funded one site on 2 different things, although they were in 2 different kinds of projects. But if you came in as a targeted site and then came back as a comprehensive, we would want to know, well, what is it that you haven't done as a targeted site, and what would be specifically that you would be doing more as a comprehensive site? And I could imagine there might be examples of institutions that would fit that bill.
All right, and within the 2011 RFP process itself, once you apply as a comprehensive or a targeted, then that's kind of the track that you're on, correct?
Well, actually, we've had several cases in the past in which people have come in for comprehensive proposals, and we had discussions with them in the 2 to 3 page reviews and saying, we like what you're trying to do, we think that this is the right idea, but we really don't think that this is going to be sustainable within the type of organization, so we would encourage you to apply for the targeted proposal. And several of those have been then successful at that level. But I'd say that once you're in, if you apply as a targeted site, you'll be evaluated on a targeted basis. The panel might come and say, you know, this site is gangbusters, and we really recommend that they go for a full proposal. So the panel could make a recommendation like that. I haven't seen that happen yet, though, in the three RFPs that we've run.
Okay. Another question here on related to your slide on what we don't fund, and related to this bullet point on unconnected programs. So there's in there the parenthetical note about LAs without a comprehensive program. So the question is, what would make a targeted proposal good without it seeming like it wasn't going to work because it had only some of the pieces?
I guess the larger answer to that question is, are you going to be able to create more teachers, and how does this blend into existing efforts? So if you've got if you have an effort that is trying to fund, trying to create more teachers, and you've got this piece in here, you've got, for example, you've got a good early teaching experience, and what you need to do is LAs and recruitment, and also I need to make sure that I have an interaction with the teachers that is gangbusters. That might fit in really well because those are the areas that are missing right now. Maybe the School of Education is already doing a great job with induction and mentoring. Maybe you already know some teachers that are connected to you. So I think you want to think about, will the funding come in, allow me to significantly increase the numbers of teachers, and does it fit in with what's currently in place? Because if none of the pieces are there, and you have to say, well, I'm going to put in LAs because I think that might do what's going on, that doesn't seem to me, and I don't know how the panel will react to it, but I suspect it similarly, that is a program that really that fits together. I use the word comprehensive program in that bullet point, but it's probably the wrong word since it might sound like the other kind of proposal. But and by here I mean comprehensive, I mean a well-connected program. So perhaps there's a confusion on the word itself. But you really want a program in which the pieces fit together. So if it's just, well, let's get an LA because we haven't got an LA program because I think LAs are cool, yeah, that's probably not enough. Does it fit into a bona fide effort to actually recruit teachers and to help them into the classroom? That's when it would seem to be a reasonable thing.
All right. So another question here from someone wanting you to expand in your statement about concerns regarding small rural schools where teaching is limited to only a few courses. And the question is, how can PhysTEC help with these kinds of issues?
Right. So the probably comes off of this slide where we mentioned that there are 27,000 teachers of physics, and the numbers that are actually teaching full-time physics is actually considerably less. I think something around 9,000, at least on one thing that I looked at. So the question here, I guess, is how can you help prepare some of the teachers to have a good background in physics? So if you take a rural Mississippi, Alabama, I always mention those two states, but I can go further beyond that because many states have rural populations that are out there in which the teachers need to teach. Even Minnesota, where I'm from, if you go up into the northern parts of the state, smaller high schools in which the teacher is going to have to teach a bunch of things. One of the things that we encourage on states that allow this is for teachers to get multiple certifications. And so mathematics is oftentimes a very good place for a teacher to get a multiple certification. They can teach mathematics and then the 1 or 2 physics sections that they might do. So they might have 3 sections of math and 2 sections of physics, for example. There's one way of kind of addressing that. The other thing is that there is just, you have to kind of understand the issues in which the school districts are up against and start to understand how to talk to them about these issues. Because if they're hiring a bunch of people to teach physics who really have no idea and are really not interested in doing it, that's a different thing. And the other option is that we can, the other option we can do is that a PhysTEC teacher can be counted if they have a minor in physics. And so a minor is a great way for them to have adequate knowledge for teaching the high school physics course, but perhaps their major is going to be in chemistry, or perhaps it's going to be in mathematics. And so they can teach that as their primary subject and can allow them to teach 1 or 2 physics courses on the side. The other thing I'll add is that we have found in a bunch of places when we get a good PhysTEC teacher in there, the number of classes or sections that the teacher can actually offer in physics goes up, because the students learn that here is a dedicated instructor who really cares about what's going on and cares about helping them understand the courses and things like that. So that's another way in which you can kind of think about that problem.
All right, so it actually looks like we are out of time for the official part of the webinar, although if you want to stick around, there are a few more questions, and we will we'll spend a little bit of time afterwards addressing some of these. But at this point, I'd like to thank Ted for your informative presentation and hand things back over to Crystal.
Yes, thanks, Monica, and thank you, Ted, for your great presentation. As Monica mentioned, this is all the time we have for the official webinar, but we will be sticking around for 10 or 15 minutes or so for those of you whose schedules allow it to continue the discussion. But if you have to leave now, we do apologize if we did not get to your question. As they mentioned, as Ted and Monica mentioned, you can either follow up with me, send it to webinars@aps.org, or to Ted. I believe that his email is on the bottom of the slides, and also we can send Monica's email also. For those of you who are signing off now, we welcome you to, follow up with the speakers, yes, sorry. Also, the slides of the presentation will be available on the main PhysTEC solicitation page. I put the URL for that in the box earlier, but I can do that again. And you'll also be directed there at the end of this webinar. Please allow 24 hours for us to upload the video and also the slides from the presentation. You will also receive an email from us containing a link to the recording of today's presentation. So there are many ways that you'll be able to view and review this presentation over the coming days. And lastly, in order to help us continue to develop quality webinar presentations, please help us by taking a moment to complete the short survey when you exit the webinar today. That wraps up today's event. We hope that you will join us next time. And Monica, you can feel free to continue the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, we have just a few more questions. So, Ted, if you can stick around, maybe we can get to some of these. Okay. So one question here, which I think is probably shared by more than just the participant here, is at our institution, departmental resources are limited. That is, the physics department has a very small budget. Does this rule us out?
No, I don't think it does rule you out, but again, it gets back to this sustainable question. So what is it that you can sustain in thinking about these kinds of things? So maybe PhysTEC can be a little bit of money to help kind of kick you into gear on initial, but then you've got a sustainable action that you can take, that you can go forward. And so I think you need to make the case for that this is something that, one of the reasons that we established the targeted proposals is that we wanted to think about ways in which we could fund smaller institutions or institutions that were going to take another and more interesting kind of bend on this that could be useful for others to kind of think about. So it doesn't necessarily write you out of that, but by the same token, you need to make sure that you make great alliances with the right kinds of people. So with your School of Education, with your dean, how are you going to be able to maintain what's going on? The other thing that has worked for a number of institutions is to say, well, here's what we propose to do. What if we do X? If we do X, can we have Y? And so to kind of do a little trading and saying, we think that this is possible. If we can come through on this and do bring in these kinds of numbers, can you help us do this thing, this sort of thing that we need to sustain the program? I think that's one of the ways that you can use this kind of conversation with your dean or with your School of Education or with a neighboring university. Maybe you team up with another university. We have had proposals from collaborations of universities is another way of thinking about that as well.
Yeah, and something I'd like to add is that for the sites that we funded out of last year's RFP, when funds were also tight for many institutions, we were actually kind of pleasantly surprised to see that all of the ones that we were able to fund, those institutions were able to find matching funds to sustain the sort of the major program elements for at least 3 years after the end of PhysTEC funding. And they did it in various creative ways by making alliances, as you mentioned, Ted, not just from the department, but at the dean level and different levels of contributing. But there are a lot of places where little pots, you can get little pots of money, of course depending on the institution. But we did see that commitment to sustainability by institutions, even when some of the funding was tight. Okay, next question here. From someone who's in a state that produces only a couple of physics teachers per year statewide. And due to the very small numbers, any efforts must include both in-service teachers along with pre-service teachers. Is such a collaboration at a targeted site viewed favorably, or is it viewed as having a heavy emphasis on in-service teacher preparation? Or is this the role of the teacher advisory group?
Right, so the main emphasis of PhysTEC has been on pre-service teacher education. In other words, new teachers who are coming in, as opposed to in-service, which would be an existing teacher who is needing to be retrained to be able to teach physics. So if your project is just in-service stuff, then we will not fund it. That's pretty clear from us. However, a number of things that we have done with sites have included in-service teachers in their projects. For example, they run a science methods course that's specifically oriented towards physicists, and they do it during the summer so that they can keep the enrollment numbers up enough to be able to meet enrollment quotas that they need to have at the university, but still engage their pre-service teachers in something like that. So in that case, it's actually a plus to involve the in-service teachers in those kinds of things. So that's an example of that. So I think that it could actually be a plus in what you want to do, because we know that in-service teacher education is important. It's just something that we can't fund on its own, that sort of thing. And then your question about teacher advisory groups. Teacher advisory groups are typically, they work in two different ways, and we recognize both of these ways. One is really on the advisory capability, where you bring in excellent high school teachers, and they serve as a an advisory group for you to know whether you're doing the right thing or not. And that we understand that there's great value in those kinds of things. The other way is to bring in teachers and help them by providing either a make and take or some other kinds of thing in which they learn something on a smaller scale, and then you might ask them one or two questions about what are the significant needs while they're there. Perhaps you provide pizza for them or something. You do it in an evening so it's easy for them to come in, meet some of the physics faculty so they know where things are supposed to be at. Those are also kinds of questions in which you can do those sorts of things. So there are a variety of things that you can do. The teacher advisory groups can definitely work that way.
All right, and one last question here, and that is, will all the proposals selected for full submissions receive site visits?
Not necessarily. Partly, we do site visits to familiarize ourselves with the personnel and the project leadership on there. And so we oftentimes will run site visits with places that we're unfamiliar with the leadership or people that we don't know there and what's going on, or if we have specific questions about how those things might have changed. So site visits are for us to understand the project from the ground level. To some of those, we've been those places before. We know some of the personnel involved, so it's not necessary. In others, we do want to do that.
All right, well, that's we actually reached the end of our list of questions. So thanks again, Ted. And I'd like to encourage anyone who has questions, or if you want to run anything by us, please be in touch. Our contact information, referring to me and Ted, is available in the solicitation. So if you go to PhysTEC.org/solicitation, you can download a copy of that. And we're definitely interested in hearing from you about your ideas. And thanks for attending the webinar.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you both. Bye-bye.